Hello and welcome to something a little bit different on the channel. I've never really ventured into the world of top 10s before, but for a few reasons, which I'll go into in a second, I thought this would be appropriate. So today I'm going to talk about the top 10 WCW wrestlers who were missing from the invasion, as in who would have definitely improved the invasion. If you don't know what I mean by the invasion, I mean the storyline in WWF as it was then, where Vince McMahon had just bought out in real life WCW, and then soon after the rights to ECW and their video library and what have you. And they did like an invasion angle where the two companies' superstars, or some of them, invaded the WWF. However, especially the WWF, especially the WCW roster was very depleted, and I know why, I understand why, so you don't need to educate me on that in the comment section. If you're not sure, feel free to ask in the comment section. If enough people want to know and don't know, I might make a separate video on it. But yeah, basically, I understand why these superstars weren't present. However, this is just a hypothetical video about all contract issues aside, who were the 10 top superstars who were missing, and had the contract situation been different, would have certainly added to the invasion. So, the reasons for doing this. One, I can't remember what made me do it, but towards the start of the year, or maybe the end of last year now, I started watching the end of WCW, and I started with the episode where Bischoff and Russo took the belts off everyone, and this is on the WWE Network, and I watched every Nitro and every pay-per-view up till the last episode of Nitro, and then I kind of continued watching WWF from that point on, and watching the invasion happen. So that's one reason, and I was sort of very aware as I was watching it, how many stars that I'd been watching on the end of WCW suddenly weren't on this invasion angle. The second reason is today is actually the anniversary, what will it be, the 16-year anniversary of the first Alliance member, the first WCW star, appearing on WWF Raw, and it was Lance Storm who interfered in a match on Raw. 16 years, I believe it was, 2001, yep. 16 years ago today, so there you have it. And the third and final thing was I've been listening to a lot of wrestling podcasts recently, and the one I'm really getting into is the Pritchard Show with Bruce Pritchard, who used to work behind the scenes on creative and talent relations and stuff for WWF. And it's a lot of inside stories, and they actually did an episode about the final Nitro, and he was there, and he discussed the reason why they didn't sign, a lot of the wrestlers they didn't sign and stuff. So all of that kind of came together to make me really want to make this video. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you do, make sure you leave a like. That'd be fantastic to show the support. Subscribe and let me know in the comments if you subscribe because you want to see more of this kind of thing, and I'll definitely do it. And suggest topics and what have you. And share with your friends if you think they would be interested and want to put their opinion in as well. But for now, let's crack on. Let's start with some deliberate omissions. First of all, there's two superstars that I feel I would get asked about and berated for not including in the comment section. The first one is Lex Luger. Now, let me just begin by stating that as a kid, I got into wrestling through WCW, and I was quite a big Lex Luger fan. But I was a kid, I was a mark, as the term is, and he was a face, so I liked him for the most part. However, watching WCW back, watching old WWF from before my time, from the early 90s, and just watching anything with Lex Luger in made me very aware he wasn't very good. And apparently he was quite difficult to deal with as well. So aside from the fact that he obviously had some issue with his contract, I don't think WWE or WWF, it still was at the time, would have been keen to take him on. And personally, I don't think he would have added much, maybe a bit of a body guy, to impress the fans with his posing. But then the bell rings. What is it Bruce Pritchard says? Then the bell has to ring. And that's the problem, I think, with them signing Lex Luger. So I'm not going to include him in my list. The other superstar that I'm not going to include, which might be more controversial, is Rey Mysterio Jr., as he was in WCW before he dropped the Junior, coming to WWE. The reason for that is because Rey was wrestling without the mask towards the end of WCW for quite a while. And I think it was a really good move on either his part or WWE's part or whoever really orchestrated it for him not to go straight to WWE and for him to come back with the mask. I don't think Ray would have ever won the world title if he'd have appeared without the mask, if he'd have not had the mask in WWE. I don't think he would have been pushed or treated anything like as seriously as he was. And I know the world title had a lot of factors, including Eddie dying and what have you. But I firmly believe, even with that, without the mask, he wouldn't have been given that big of a push. He might have got a little bit of a sympathy push to the Cruiserweight title or something, but nothing as big. So, yeah, I think Rey Mysterio staying out of this was a very good move for his career, so I'm not going to include him in the list. I feel like that went right with hindsight, so I'm not going to include him. Honourable mentions. Now, the first honourable mention, I want to mention, this is the third time I've recorded this. The first time I realised most of the way through I'd forgotten someone major. We'll talk about that shortly and why I forgot that someone major. The second time, it didn't save my audio at all, so I'm having to completely re-record this, you know, as close as I can. But obviously it's going to be completely different because I'm not working off a script. The reason I'm mentioning that is because the first time when I omitted someone, before I then inserted them into the list, this guy was number 10 on my list, so he's definitely worth an honourable mention because he was on the original list. And that's Disco Inferno, which, bear with me guys, because obviously we're getting to the big stars, but first you have to start off with some of the fringe guys and the mid-card and even lower card guys. Disco Inferno would have been a better Shawn Stasiak than Shawn Stasiak was. Now, don't get me wrong, some of Shawn Stasiak stuff did make me laugh, but anyone could have made me laugh running into a wall past The Rock, you know, during a promo segment or in William Regal's office or whatever. I feel like Disco Inferno would have made a better comedic lower to mid card heel, and Shawn Stasiak could then have been allowed to do something a little bit more serious, you know, maybe form a tag team with another young guy, or be in the sort of lower mid card fighting some of the lower mid card WWF guys. I don't know, but I feel like Disco Inferno would have helped the Invasion by having his own presence, which would have been entertaining, and also improving someone else's presence, being Shawn Stasiak. So that's my little thought on him. Always feel free, by the way, anything I say, let me know in the comment section down below. Either start a comment and just keep it open while you're listening to me, or leave multiple comments. I don't care how you do it, but anything you agree with, disagree with, if you want to leave your own list, anything like that, comment section, go, go, go. I really want us to have a conversation about this. I want this to be an interactive channel, so go ahead. Now, the other honourable mentions that I was always planning on including, the first one's Sid Vicious, because obviously I can't really include him in the list because he wasn't missing because of a contract issue. He was missing because he broke his leg. And to me, that is a much more legitimate reason to not have him. Even all contract issues aside, he broke his leg in January. He wasn't good to... It was a bad break, you know. It wasn't like a... You know, when people talk about breaking something, it's like a hairline fracture. No, he just clean snapped his leg. You know, he had another knee. So, like, he was not an option no matter what his contract said and no matter how much either side wanted him. So I don't feel like it's fair to include him in the list because that's basically, with him and the other honourable mention I'm going to give, it's sort of like me saying, well, I would have liked Lou Thez to be involved, you know, if he were, you know, this many years younger and, you know, in good shape and what have you. It's just not realistic to have expected them to be able to be involved no matter what. So, yeah, Sid Vicious, and the other one is Scott Hall, purely because Scott Hall, I don't think was with WCW at the end, because of his alcohol issues, and I think they'd released him. So he was obviously battling his own, what they call on wrestling a lot, demons. So I don't think he would have been available again, no matter what the contract situation was, and no matter how much either side wanted him. I don't think he would have been available, and even if he'd have made himself available, he'd probably have relapsed and not added anything to the Invasion, so I'm leaving Scott Hall out as well. But without further ado, because we're almost 10 minutes into the video and I haven't started the list yet. Sorry guys, I do ramble, my bad. We're going to go straight into number 10. And number 10 on my list of the WCW superstars who would definitely have added something to the Invasion storyline is The Wall. Now, if you're not completely familiar with WCW, you might not have heard of The Wall. But basically, there was a guy called Alex Wright who was a cruiserweight. He danced. He got paired with Disco Inferno at one point because, you know, they both dance. But he was German, and at one point he got repackaged as Berlin because obviously he's German, so let's call him Berlin. And he was like this gothic German typical foreign heel who just hated America and Americans, and everyone booed him for being foreign. And he brought in a bodyguard called The Wall, who, apart from his name being a reference obviously to the Berlin Wall, kind of implies he was a pretty big guy. He was a big dude. And that's my main reasoning, basically, behind it. He was still with WCW right at the end. He'd gone through a few different, like, factions and gimmick changes and what have you. But he was still with them. And I just think in the land of the giants that WWF always was, he would have fitted in. He would have been able to stand face to face with like the Big Show, the Undertaker, Kane, and not looked overfaced. I'm not saying he was the greatest worker. I'm not saying he was the greatest character or the greatest performer they've ever had, but he certainly would have been a presence for the Alliance, like an enforcer. He could have gone back to wearing the full black suit with the black tie and been like an enforcer, kind of like he was for Berlin. They could have done stuff like that with him. I don't know, but he just would have been such a big presence. I think they missed a trick by not hiring him. Number 9 on the list will be Jeff Jarrett. Now, aside from the potential contract issues, I think we all know why Jeff Jarrett didn't get signed when Vince bought WCW. He was the one guy that Vince specifically said, I'm not signing him on WWF Raw when he bought Nitro. He actually spelt his name GOONNEE, I think it was, which is obviously gone, but really dramatic, like gone. So I think there was a bit of an issue, and if you know your history of wrestling, you probably know why. But that's exactly why I think they missed the trick. Jeff Jarrett was a big name in WCW towards the end, rightly or wrongly. He was a multiple-time world champion. He was always up near the top of the card or thereabouts in the latter sort of couple of years of WCW. And aside from that, put the IC title on him. Have him hold it up and refuse to defend it unless Vince pays him more money or pays him some money, because obviously, in theory, the Alliance would be the ones paying him. Shane McMahon would be the one paying him. In kayfabe, so demand money from Vince to defend the title and blur that line behind the, I want to say reality, but I don't know if it's confirmed or if it's just a rumor, but what was supposed to have happened, and the storyline, blur that line. And Jeff Jarrett everyone hated Jeff Jarrett, let's be honest, whether it was because you were supposed to hate him and he was playing a heel, or whether it was because you hated the backstage politics that was rumored to be going on and therefore hated him. Everyone hated Jeff Jarrett, so voila. Perfect for a heel stable. Anyway, moving on to number 8. And number 8, I admit, I probably only ranked above Jeff Jarrett because I preferred him as a performer. In all honesty, these two could probably be switched, and Jeff Jarrett would have been a bigger deal. But my number 8 is Vampiro. I was a big fan of Vampiro. I thought he had a great look. I thought he was good in the ring. I thought his stuff versus Sting was ridiculous, but highly entertaining at the same time. And as ridiculous as it was, I don't feel like two guys could have done a better job than Vampiro and Sting had done with it, if you know what I mean. I think they made the absolute best they could out of it. And I think Vampiro was definitely a talent that WWF missed out on at the time. I think he was a natural heel, and again, we're talking about a heel invasion stable. I know they came in as faces, but they quickly turned heel, so he could have come in, they could have started with a small invasion force, and then when they turned heel, boom, insert the Jeff Jarretts and the Vampiros. Then, if we're going to talk about the potential for having faces and heels on both sides shortly anyway. But, I feel like Vampiro had that sort of dark gimmick going on where he could have fitted in with The Undertaker. And I know Undertaker was doing his biker gimmick, but they could have still referenced the Dead Man stuff. Kane, having that strong gimmick was a big thing in WWF. So I'm surprised they didn't take Vampiro, actually. They must have genuinely just not seen anything in him, but that does surprise me because I thought he was great. Number 7, Rick Steiner. Now, I have split the Steiner brothers here, not because they would necessarily have to be split on TV, but because I think they presented their own strengths as individuals, and then that combines to say, also, you could just stick them together as the Steiner brothers that the WWF audience knew, from a decade before, and then you've got like a double benefit, 2 birds, 1 stone. You've got a formidable tag team that can start challenging tag teams like The Undertaker and Kane and stuff like that. But you've also got Rick Steiner, who established himself in WCW as a very strong mid-card and mostly as a heel, but he had a bit of a face run. But we're looking for heels here, guys. And he was a very good US champion mid-card heel. And I think he could have carried that over into WWF quite comfortably and potentially teamed up with Scott, who we are going to see later in the list. There's no way he's outside the top 10. So, yeah, Rick Steiner definitely would have been a great addition. And let's not forget his legitimacy as an actual wrestler. Him and Scott both came from an amateur background. Maybe they could have played on that with Kurt a bit. Yeah, no, there's endless ways they could go with this. But that's the way I would envision it, is as a mid-card heel, US champion, IC champion kind of contender. Number 6, Kevin Nash. Now, the reason, there's a couple, he's the one I left out of version 1, and I realised when I got to talking about number 3 that I just looked at my list. I've not got a script, I've just literally got a top 10 list that I made, and it's scribbled out and everyone's moved around. But I just suddenly looked at it and went, where's Kevin Nash? And the reason why I think I left him out was because of my honourable mention, Scott Hall. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, for me, in my mind, ever since they went to WCW, are a package. And Kevin Nash doesn't have the same appeal without Scott Hall, and that's probably why he's so low down the list, why he's only in number 6. If Hall had been in any fit state to come over as like a complete NWO, or even just the outsiders together, it would have been a much bigger deal, and I think Kevin Nash would have been higher up my list, and they'd probably be on the same spot as like a combined unit. I don't think you could split the two in terms of importance. So, yeah, Kevin Nash is great on the mic. He can cut a promo. He's decent in the ring. He's big. And again, like I said about the Wall, can stand across from the Big Show, Undertaker, Kane, Test, the big guys that WWF had, and not be dwarfed by them. In fact, he'd be bigger than, I think, Test by a good couple of inches, I think. I'm not sure about my wrestler heights and stuff, and, you know, you're never sure how much of it's a work and how much of it's real anyway. But yeah, Kevin Nash is a big guy, could stand across from these guys, and could hold his own on the mic. But I also saw him as potentially like, he's I don't know if you remember, but Coach Kevin or Coach Kev or Coach Nash, I think it was Coach Nash in WCW, where he had the Natural Born Thrillers with him, the young guys who were all out of the power plant. He could have done something like that as well and stayed out of the ring for the most part. Obviously, he was still capable of going, so he could have got into the ring. But for the most part, he could have been coaching the younger guys in the Alliance and sort of accompanying them to ringside and using them kind of like they did in WCW. And I know they broke up in WCW before the end, but put them back together. It's not like it's never happened before with a team or with a manager combo, you know, with a wrestler. So, you know, put them back together and use Kevin Nash like that. I think that'd be the best use for Kevin Nash personally. You know, keep that sort of thing going with the occasional in-ring match, maybe just pay-per-views, and maybe have the young guys fight his battles on the build-up to pay-per-view. So say he's feuding with the Undertaker, well, he chucked Sean O'Hare in against him, and then he chucked Sean Stasiak in against him, and sometimes they cheat and get a win, and it gives those guys the rub beating Undertaker, albeit uncleanly. You know, it's one of those where you could have built guys using that. Number 5 is Ric Flair. Now, Ric Flair, for me, shouldn't have been wrestling for the Alliance in the Invasion, but he's not Mr. WCW, we'll get to him shortly, but he's certainly a number 2 for that. You know, he had moved around a bit, he wasn't quite as loyal as he could have been at all times in his career, but he was very strongly associated with WCW. Most of his 16 world title reigns were in WCW or the NWA, which obviously didn't become WCW, but WCW was kind of affiliated with the NWA up until a certain point. So a lot of his success came through WCW and its predecessors. I think he would have been a great sort of authority figure, sort of like Paul Heyman for ECW. You had the two owners, the two McMahons as the owners, Shane and Stephanie. Under Stephanie, you had Paul Heyman working for ECW, sort of running ECW. He was the motivator, you know, the locker room leader, if you like. I think Ric Flair would have been perfect in there underneath Shane McMahon for WCW, you know, and obviously they're all working together, but to have that hierarchy be symmetrical, like both ways down, would be great. So Shane McMahon's money runs the place, but Ric Flair, you know, is that locker room leader. You know, he's a 16-time world champion. Like, come on, you got to follow this guy. And I think having the likes of your Kevin Nash and your Ric Flair there takes away the need to have someone like Stone Cold for the sort of pedigree and the legitimacy of like a championship guy. Whether they're wrestling or not, you don't need Stone Cold to jump ship, which I think was a big mistake, having guys jumping from side to side. I feel like it would have been a big deal if maybe only one guy had ever done it, or if only the ECW guys had done it right at the start, because Paul Heyman's such a great leader and they all wanted to be back with him. You know, something like that would have made it a much bigger deal when it did happen, if it didn't happen as often, because you had the likes of Test and Christian and Kurt Angle and Stone Cold, William Regal, I'm trying to think who else, Molly Holly. You know, like, people just jumped for fun sometimes from one side to the other, and I just feel like it would have been better if you'd have just had enough credible stars that you didn't need anyone to jump, and you could have had Stone Cold leading the WWF alongside The Rock, and a bit of rivalry there between the two, you know, over who's really leading the charge. And then you have all the big names on the WCW side. So I think Ric Flair would have been a great addition. He could have done a lot of the Stone Cold job, except for the wrestling, if you like. You know, a lot of the berating people when they didn't perform that well and stuff like that. I think there's a better guy for that higher up the list, but Ric Flair certainly could have filled that gap as like an authority figure within the Alliance. Anyway, on to number 4, and the top 4 I wrote down almost straight away. I knew who I wanted, but the order was really difficult. I played with all 4 of these guys as the number 1 pick on my top 10, so I was really at odds with myself over who to use. I consulted some friends and that had been watching WCW back in the day and would have an opinion, and eventually I made my own choice, but their input was obviously invaluable, looking at things from different perspectives and what have you. But number 4 I went with Scott Steiner, and I was so tempted to put him number 1 just because of his run he had towards the end, where he was the world champion, just running over people. It was entertaining. It was probably the only reason I stuck with it when I was watching it back on the network, if I'm honest, because he was just so entertaining. You just didn't know what he was going to do. You got the feeling that WCW didn't know what he was going to do half the time. Whether that was really good performing on his part, or whether that was just genuinely he's just a loose cannon maniac, it's for anyone to decide, really. He certainly backs it up now that it might be a little bit of a loose cannon, but back then you really didn't know. It was just a bit like, is this an act, or is everyone genuinely terrified of this guy? But yeah, and he only lost the title on the very last Nitro, so, and he again oozed heel. He was built so WWF style, he was just a massive guy. He was intimidating. He was, a trained amateur wrestler. He had a little bit of history in WWF, and the thought I had for Rick and Scott was to keep them kind of separate, because they could play off the fact that, well, not keep them separate, keep them together, but refusing to go the tag team route with them. And the reason was they were always a tag team in WWF, and even though it's not what really happened behind the scenes, they could claim that, they didn't see any potential in them as single stars, so they kept them together and kept them down by keeping them together as a team and not letting them thrive as single stars. But look what happened when WCW gave us a chance. I was world champion, Rick was US champion, and we dominated. And I think they could go that route, like that bitter, you didn't give us a chance route, and it'd really give them something to build on for the Steiners, to be a formidable force in the invasion. But I definitely think Scott brought more to the table than Rick, just because of how good his end run was. Whether good's probably the wrong word, but how entertaining he was at the end of WCW. He was just the MVP by far, in my opinion. Anyway, number 3, who again could have been number 1 because he is Mr. WCW himself, Sting, the franchise of World Championship Wrestling, the man. Sting, the only reason I put him in number 3 is just because of how naturally face he is. And obviously you were looking for a heel alliance to happen. I don't know if that was always the plan, but that's how it played out. So, I'm looking at everyone from a heel perspective. Now, I did mention that potentially heels and faces could be on both sides. Chris Jericho, towards the end of the storyline, was basically a heel. Well, no, he was a heel. It wasn't basically a heel. He was a heel. He was feuding with The Rock. But he was still in Team WWF. He didn't jump ship when he turned heel. He just turned heel and still stayed within the ranks. X-Pac was a heel. Not by choice, I don't think. I mean, obviously they played to it eventually, but I think they expected him to get cheered for being WWF and he just didn't. So why can't you have a face on the Alliance? Rob Van Dam was kind of face, but still did heelish stuff. Why can't you have a pure face on the Alliance who wants... He's doing it for all the right reasons. He wants WCW to win the war. He's loyal. He's faithful. He sticks with his side that's always been his side. But he won't cheat, or if someone cheats on his behalf, someone interferes in his match, he gets annoyed with them, and he doesn't appreciate it, and he wants to win the war, but he wants to win it fairly. Perfect, you've got a face on the Alliance side then, who's still very much on the Alliance side, but also he's a face, so he's not a bad guy, and I think that would have been interesting, so I don't think he had to be a heel, but I put him down on the list just because he wouldn't be able to play the heel that convincingly, I don't think. Whereas the top 2, one definitely can, and one, in my opinion, can. So let's move on to number 2, which is Hollywood Hulk Hogan. Now, Hogan was number 2 despite the fact that the NWO wasn't going to be here because Scott Hall can't be here, as I mentioned in the honourable mentions. So the NWO could potentially have been number 1 as a unit if I'd have put all 3 together on the same rank. But Hogan should have been Austin. Like, I know I said Flair had the potential to do some of the non-in-ring stuff, but Hogan could have been the champion, could have done the in-ring stuff, could have berated his side for this and that. He could have had all the Hogan Appreciation Night instead of Austin Appreciation Night and stuff like that. And I think it would have been fantastic. I think it would have been every bit as good as Austin was. I mean, Austin was phenomenal. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people don't like Austin's heel run in 2001. I think he's brilliant, personally, doing that. They ruined his character a little bit. He came off a little bit cowardly. He could have been a bit more bold, still as a heel, but yeah, it was very, very good. But I think Hogan could have done it every bit as well, and I think, he got cheered when he did eventually come back, and they eventually had to turn him face, but I think if it had been a bit less cartoony like he was against, in the NWO versus The Rock and Austin feud the year later, if it had been a little bit less cartoony and a little bit more gritty, I think Hogan could have got himself booed. Let's be honest, he really could have. So, yeah, I think Hogan's number 2, which leaves number 1 for Goldberg. Now, Goldberg did play a heel in WCW, and unlike Austin, they didn't really make him cowardly. He took a few cheap shots and what have you, but he was still generally just running through people. They were just faces, and he was doing it at the order of, like, your Vince Russos and your 8 Bischoffs for money. So it made him a heel because, he sold out. And he was dominant, and he was terrifying to his opponents, and he had this aura about him, Goldberg. Can you imagine if the Alliance had Goldberg to let loose on WWF, and Hogan and Sting and Steiner? This is why they were clearly my top 4, because to me, they were the 4 guys where if the Alliance had had them, you could have convinced WWF fans they had a chance of losing this war. Whereas, realistically, everyone knew WWF's going to win, it's on WWF TV. But, Goldberg and Hogan and Sting and Steiner could have convinced people, had people in doubt during matches, that, hang on, this isn't good. Look at this team we're fighting. Like, I'm not saying they would all be in the Survivor Series team, maybe they would, but just in general, look at this force that we're fighting. They've got Goldberg, for God's sake. The man's barely ever lost, and keep him unbeaten. Don't ruin him like you did when he eventually turned up in WWE. Keep him pretty much unstoppable. I mean, he was a bit unstoppable in his first WWE run, but not as much as he was in WCW. You keep him as a real legitimate threat, and you could have an absolute monster of a team on your hands if you had these 10 guys. Let me know in the comment section down below who you think would be your number 1, or who would be your top 10, or however many you want to list, who you definitely wouldn't include, what you think of my list, what you agree on, what you disagree on. Do you think the invasion was doomed anyway as a concept and it wouldn't have mattered who they brought, or do you think part of the problem was the sheer fact that they had Booker T, DDP, and then a bunch of lower card, basically jobbers? Some of them were getting a mini push in WCW, but they weren't big stars like your Hogans, your Goldbergs, your Stings, your Steiners. So they needed to fall back on your likes of your Austins and Kurt Angle later on to basically fill out the numbers, because they just didn't have enough terrifying names. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, remember, if you're interested in more top 10s, let me know and what you'd like me to do, or just any discussion videos. Don't have to be top 10s. So yeah, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here, and don't forget to share with your friends. But for now, all I have left to say is thank you very much for watching. As always, I've been Ibeza, you've been amazing, and I will see you next time.